What does a coffee roasting company do outside of making coffee go from looking like this to this? Well, making coffee turn brown is at the core of what a coffee roasting company is. However, there are so many smaller tasks under that help support and make the main task run well and hopefully ending up with a very tasty and delicious product. Well, we're gonna break this down into 3 sections. What happens before it gets roasted, what happens during it gets roasted, and what happens after it gets roasted. Part 1 is what happens before it gets roasted. Now, coffee roasters need to find coffee, and oftentimes finding coffee looks like connecting with people that we call importers and exporters of green coffee around the world. Now, there are very, very few coffee roasting companies out there that actually go directly to the farm and buy it directly from the farmer or the producer. Most of the time, they're connecting with importers and exporters, people who build the relationships on the ground, who are the boots on the ground to finding these coffees from these farmers, purchasing it from them, and taking care of all the logistics to get it into the country. And from there, they can also support us roasters by providing flavor notes and characteristics and information about the coffee. These importers will send samples to us roasters, and then we'll dive right into the cupping table. The cupping table is essentially how we taste coffee. And this is where all the fun work begins, because it's just drinking coffee after coffee after coffee, which is great. That sounds like the dream. But we're looking for coffees that are gonna fit our menu, that are gonna fit a specific flavor profile, a price point, and that's going to be available in the quantity that we need. Now, arguably, this is probably the most important step of the whole process before it even gets to roasting, because the coffee that you start with is probably going to be the coffee that you're gonna end with. So if you make the wrong buying decision on the green sourcing side, you're going to end up with the wrong coffee after it's roasted. That's with the hope that you actually roasted the way it's supposed to be roasted. Which takes us to part 2. You find the perfect coffee. Now it's time for roasting. Now, each roaster has a general approach to roasting. Some roasters only roast dark roast, some only roast medium roast, some only roast light roast, and some roasters out there actually roast the whole spectrum. But even within that whole spectrum of roasting coffee, roasters usually have a general approach that they take for their light roasted coffee, for their medium roasted coffee, and for their dark roasted coffee. However, each coffee comes with its own moisture content, water activity, characteristics, density, and all those things play a role in how you roast it. So the first part of the process is really dialing in the coffee for it to taste exactly the way you want it to. Now, speaking of dialing in, there's a lot of data tracking that's happening. You have a data logging software connected to your machine that logs the time and the speed and the temperature of your roast. All these pieces of data and information are going to help you get the coffee exactly to where you want it to. And this is where the roasting company gets to shine. Because even if you give the same coffee to 5 or 10 different roasting companies and roasters, you actually might end up with significantly different flavor profiles. This is where the roasting company, the head roaster, maybe the person in charge of quality control can work together to create something really beautiful and tasty that's unique to their roasting approach. Now, the work isn't done just there. This brings us to the last part of the process, which is what happens after the coffee gets roasted. Well, we're going right back to the cupping table. We're tasting. And we taste simply because we want to make sure the coffee's tasting up to par, making sure the way we dialed it in, the way we want the coffee to taste, continues to taste that same way week in and week out, month in and month out. And as the coffee ages, the coffee's flavor profile will begin to change, and it's the roaster's job to be able to manage those differences and those nuances in the roasting process. Outside of cupping and tasting more and more coffee, you're also documenting other pieces of information to analyze your roasts. You're looking at maybe your Agtron rating, which is a scale of how dark or how light you roasted your coffee. You're also maybe looking at your weight loss, which is how much weight was lost in the coffee after the roasting process, which is a really important indicator of your development. All these pieces of information are very important to take note of and to observe because you want your coffee to be tasting the same week in and week out, and consistency is a huge factor in the whole coffee roasting process. Now, although it's very easy to confuse owning a coffee roasting company with owning a coffee shop, those two things are very different and function very differently. Even though most coffee roasting companies own cafes and coffee shops, and most coffee shops at some point will be intrigued and interested in roasting their own coffee. Now, over the last 10, 15 years, it seems like there's been a growing trend of micro roasteries popping up everywhere without necessarily having some kind of storefront or cafe. Through the power of just the internet and being able to ship your coffee around the country and even around the world, this is becoming more and more popular. In this video, I did not go over everything that a coffee roasting company does. However, this should give you a pretty decent idea as to what happens behind the scenes, as well as how a coffee roasting company differs from a coffee shop. Well, friends, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. See ya.